Okay, so we want to go over Fannie Mae's recent release at being we're an income calculation service. Obviously, we always keep up on the latest and greatest of income. And I'll say there is some changes here, but they're not dramatic. They're actually a nice streamlining, and we'll go through all that. So no big panic. No, you're not going to like lose a bunch of incomes or gain a bunch of incomes. They've done a better job at defining some things. I think what's happened, and this is just my opinion. Remember, I don't work at Fannie Mae, nor do I speak for them. This is just Mike, a 32-year underwriter, expressing his opinion here. Is that, building out their own, we integrate with it, but building out their own income calculators now, like Fannie is, and they kind of have to like answer the questions that we've had to answer as underwriters for many years. Maybe sometimes they read their own guidelines, and go, hey, we could probably better define this. So just like every company, we always want to get, practice and get better and better and better. So I think they're doing a great job, and that's kind of like my opinion about some of these changes. So let's go through what's happening. So first of all, let's say it in their own words. So if you got the announcement, they're basically talking about we're going to, kind of fix some general principles, get rid of some separate topics, right? They were kind of all over the place. Now they're in one area. Standardize documentation and create consistent wording or terminology on here. Now, these changes have to go in effect as June 1st, but you can use them now. I'm going to be showing you our software, and our software actually can handle almost all this now, but we're going to officially change everything over about a week before June 1st. So, like I said, I'll show you how it does it now, and that you could use either method, the longer, older method, or the shortened, more concise method they're showing here. So I'll be demonstrating our software a little bit in here. Not meant to be, these are webinars are meant to be informational for the industry. They're not a sales webinar. I'm teaching as an underwriter, but I will be showing you our income calculator because many of you on here are clients. And of course, one of the services we provide is keeping up on all this information. All right. So what's changing again? General things, streamlining and variable income types is probably the biggest. Better for clarification for certain income types, like seasonal, they're being more, instead of just saying calculated, they're actually defining it a little bit better, and cleaned up guidance or guidelines for ease of use. So we'll walk through that now. First thing, they switched all their, and I say all because the guideline just had a general principle that it goes from the note date now. Some incomes were app date, some were note date. Now they're just saying, look, everything must be continuing for 3 years from the note date. Now, when I teach underwriting, I have the four rules of all income. Number one, income must be stable to qualify, right? It can't be all over, wildly up, wildly down, because it's not stable. But the second, and probably the most important thing is if it's not 36 months continuing, you can't use it. I don't know of any income that, let's say you've got 18 months left on child support or 16 months left in your assets for retirement, you can't use it. Now, even at 3 years, if it's going to go away and that's the only income they have, it's still questionable if you should use it. But now we know the 3 years starts from the note date, not the app date, which could be, the difference between you getting approved before was I closed it in June of, but the income was 3 years from the app date of April, right? So they're getting rid of that confusion. Now, let's start going through the more common ones and what they did. So we'll go through the base pay first, and we'll work through variable and a couple other income types. So what they're basically saying is only requires the most recent pay stub and most recent W-2 now. What they're doing in general is not caring about the prior year, all right? So if we're looking at now, it would be 26 and 25 only. This is great because it streamlines the amount of information you need to get from your borrower, makes it a lot easier on there. So, and I noticed there's a few typos in here. This was kind of an impromptu webinar. I'm just looking at like, ooh, there's a typo. I got to fix it, but I'll fix it in the post on it. But anyhow, the reminder, there's a got you, and I like to bring up in the guidelines when they say, hey, you can figure out all this income with a W-2 and pay stub and one pay stub or pay stubs from the current year. Well, let's talk about that a little bit and just kind of be careful when we use this wording. But for fixed base pay, it's kind of just, you don't need to get the older W-2. Before it was kind of optional, and now it's just off the table. Now, the gotcha I want to talk about is when you see the wording about recent pay stub and W-2, remember, they're also talking in the guidelines about you must have a minimum of 12-month history. And what happens is people submit some documents to our income calculator and they upload current pay stubs, one or two from 26, and they'll send a 25 and a 24 W-2. And they're like, why didn't you figure out the overtime? Well, how do I know in the W-2 what's in there, right? If you look at a W-2, it's a tax document. So I look at line one when you're being taxed. I look at line five, and it's another number which is higher because it's Medicare wages. And you go, well, I know you make 60 grand base pay, but your W-2 was 90,000. So somebody go, well, just assume that's all overtime. That's great. But what if I see your current pay stub and it shows overtime, bonus, parking money, whatever, right? You don't know what's in the W-2. The only time I would say that would work on what they're saying is if you have a pay stub, current ones, and you can see that this year they only have base pay and only overtime or and only a bonus. Maybe you could do it. I probably wouldn't do it on a 95 LTV, 44.9 ratio, 620 borrower, but you could probably do it. So when we're going through the variable based pay, remember there's a little bit of a gotcha. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just you got to kind of stand back and look at what they're asking, what you need to document. So, oops, pay raise out of place there. One more thing before we get off of base pay here too, and the gotcha. Pay raises also still, but they just defined a little bit better that it can be on fixed pay only. In other words, not a variable pay borrower. So if somebody's getting a $2 an hour pay raise, that's great. But you can't do it on a variable borrower where they don't have a straight 40 or a straight 30 hours or whatever. It's limited to purchase or limited cash out refis, not cash outs. Must start within 60 days. Got to verify it on a VOE or employment letter confirming when it starts and what it is. And of course, you cannot be employed by a family member. Dad or mom cannot give you a pay raise to help you qualify for a house. Okay. So now in the variable pay, like I was telling you in I keep putting the star, star, star by the W-2, referencing that gotcha moment I said. Because when you look at their guidance, it's a minimum of 12-month history to use any kind of variable based pay. Well, if I got a W-2 and I don't know if you had any overtime in 25, I don't really know what your base pay was. So it's hard for me to validate, is it been moving all 12 months? Was there a lot of base pay? Was there overtime? Because there's lots of industries where maybe, I'm in Michigan, so I'll use an example. I work at a ski hill in Michigan. So I'm full time there all year, but guess what? I doubt I have very much overtime from, April through October because there's no snow on the hill. Right now, November, December, January, February, when it's snowing and there's a lot of people there, I'm probably working my rear end off, right? A lot of overtime, things like that. So this is where, again, kind of watch the W-2 a little bit. You want to document a little bit better, but you have to have a minimum 12-month history to do it. And the new averaging guidance across the board looks like this. Stable or increasing, you're going to look at the year to date and the prior year. And again, the wording I'm using here is right from their guidelines, divided by the number of months included in the year to date and W-2s. Again, that W-2 problem. And it has a minimum of 12 months. Okay. Now, if it's going up, you would use the stable. If it's going down, you would use the year to date. Now I'm going to pull the calculator over real quick and show you what I mean in a practical example. Let me get this over. Okay, let's not push that button, Mike. Let's go F11. Okay, so restart. Okay, so when I'm looking at a variable base pay, and YEPS means year-end pay stubs or VOE, and I put it in here. So I know they're making 2,500 semi-monthly. I can see that, in 26 as of March, they made 11.5. Last year they made 52. Now, if I was getting full-time pay, I should be making 5 grand a month. Now, most of the time, you'll never see anybody with a salary making variable. I just trying to get some quick math numbers in here. But you can see that they're definitely not working full time because they're calculated and their year date don't support it. So they're definitely variable. So they were making 43, 33, and 25 in their base pay, and now they're making 4,600. So you're required to use the 2625. Now, if I was going declining within tolerance, I would be using the 26 only. Okay. So this is where, this is where you got to kind of do all the math, and our system does the math for you. So now the other thing people ask me that are not clients is like, well, how do I know how far I can go down? Here's what we've learned just through 13 years, 3.5 million loans and 30,000 loans a month of experience, right? Is that the 10% seems to be the number. I cannot point to it in some spots except for Freddie Mac. And I know USDA says 20, but typically speaking, a best practice is once it gets from 0 to 10, generally nobody says anything about it, up or down. Now, over 10 down, you need to explain why you think it's stable, or over 10 up, you need to think of why it's stable. Now, Freddie does a good job saying, and again, this is a Fannie seminar, but I'm giving you, Fannie and Freddie are like brother and sister, they're the same parent. Freddie does a good job saying 10 to 30, as long as the increase is, because a pay raise or something, fairly normal, you can use it. They kind of imply after 30, you might not want to do it. So I'm just telling you what we see in best practice. We have our threshold set to 10. So if it goes down more than 10%, we would say not recommended. If it goes up more than 10%, we put an advisory warning you about the large increase. So when you're doing the up down thing that Fannie and Freddie are talking about now, just remember, try to pick a number that's consistent for your company. Our software uses 10 as a default. Our lenders can change if they want to, but just FYI, you have to be consistent in this whole, kind of review. So that's what they're asking you to do now. Stable increasing, you use a little bit longer average. Decreasing, you would use the shorter average. Now, I'll kind of save you a little bit of back and forth. That applies to overtime, bonus, commission, tips, anything that's variable pay, right? As far as employment goes. All right, so let's go back to the slides real quick. So that's what we're kind of going through. So overtime, tips, commission, again, 12-month history, new averaging guidance is all the same for all the variables. So when you go to their actual guidelines, I'll just drag that over here. So this is their new section in Fannie Mae, and you can see it's all in one spot now. Much easier, cleaner, it has the same kind of guidance on here. And, if they have little caveats in here about like bonus, which is saying, hey, remember, bonuses are typically paid out once a year, so you have to divide them by 12. Most people get their, like I say, most people, well over 50%. I'd be lying to you if I made up a statistic, but it's definitely over 50% of people get a bonus once a year. Generally, it's a company, profit sharing or something like that. So if you get it in March, it's not divided by 3, it's divided by 12 because they're not going to get it the rest of the year. And they're just kind of reiterating that. Now in our software, we automatically default to divided by 12, just how it's set up. So just kind of FYI there. Okay. That's really the pay types, right? So what you're seeing, again, pulling the calculator back over for you to kind of redefine this, is you can drop off the older year. So when we're looking now and where our software can handle either way is if you leave this all blank, we will not factor it. Now, this will work even if right now you're not really following quote unquote the new guidance. If your DU says that you're allowed to use year date plus one, which is now pretty much allowed all the time, you didn't have to have it. So we still have the advisory because the official guideline's not changing till June 1st. So we're going to have that there. But if you leave it blank, you should be fine, right? So if it's all blank, we're just going to NA all that stuff out. We're going to give you the choice, just like the new guideline said. So we're already kind of set for it as far as this particular income goes. We have a little bit of updating to do, just mainly with advisories on the other income types. So let's kind of get back to the keep on the hits on coming here. All right, alimony and child support. There is this thing called equalization payments that they never really addressed before. But what those are is when you have somebody has, when you're trying to balance out the money and split in a divorce, one person may have to pay the other one for it. What they're saying is, hey, I've got the house and I've got $1 million in my 401k. Instead of us cashing out the 401k and paying all these fees, I will pay you $5,000 a month to make it equal for you. Now, what's the first? Remember the 4 rules of all income. If this is not going to last 36 months, you can't use it. If you're going to get a lump sum, you can't use it. This is meant to be monthly income. So just be careful, not just apply it across the board, but you can apply it as long as it's got over 36 payments and it's been consistent in all the other ways you have. So that's what it is, equalization of payments. And now you can use those for alimony or child support or any kind of maintenance agreement type thing. Something, not quite as common, the auto allowance. It can now only requires a 12-month history. Same way as before, show you got it, show you got 12 months, see it on the pay stubs, etc., etc. Border income, still 12 months, but they now have clearly defined the income. Now, border income, is very limited, right? You can only have border income in very few circumstances with Fannie Mae. They just defined a little bit better that you can validate it by bank statements, cancel checks, or other electronic payments, ACHs, Venmos, whatever that you see reasonably being dropped in your account all the time. So no big change, just documentation there. Secondary jobs, they have now changed the term. They're just called multiple jobs. What I really like about this one is it was always a struggle for me as an underwriter to go, what's your primary job and what's your secondary job? Because some people say, well, whichever one you make more money at. Well, I've seen people have, 20-hour jobs per week that make, $25 an hour, but their 40-hour job makes 20. Which is their primary? The one that makes more per hour or the one that makes more hours, right? So it was always kind of a wrestling thing that you had to do, which one have you had for 2 years, etc. Now they just call secondary jobs multiple jobs, which in today's world, unfortunately with the cost of everything, a lot of people have more than one job, right? A lot of people are doing side hustles, right? Now, obviously, we're not talking about people that do like Uber on the side or have their own business. This is like two types of jobs, and you have to follow the same rules for all jobs. So, how do you calculate income for all the jobs? Again, there's no primary, secondary anymore. There is, hey, have you had it for 2 years? And if you had it for 2 years, is it going up or down? That kind of thing. Now, if it's a fixed job, it's a fixed pay rate job, and you've had it for less than 2 years, you're okay. Because remember, the whole variability comes in at 12 months. So now you get a little bit more flexibility in those guidelines, which is great. But don't take that too far. Let's not be using borrowers that have a primary job. They got a job working 20 hours a week, for 4 weeks, and you want to use it. I don't know if I'd be using that one. It's a little bit risky. All right. Next, disability income. They never really described how long you had to have it. Now it just says now it's not now. Now it says one payment history. Again, this is where you try to put together an on-the-fly webinar because of a recent change and you see a few typos. I'll fix that. Employment offer contracts. They were always a little bit vague about it, but now it must show employer, borrower, terms of employment, including the position, type, rate of pay, and start date. So they've got to have some certain things on there. A lot like when you're looking at a VOE, it has to have certain information on there for you to use it. They just better defined it. But employment offers are still a little bit hard to use if you're not a direct seller to Fannie Freddie, because I believe it's the way it still works is you can't deliver that loan to Fannie Freddie until they get their first paycheck. So if you got hey, you're starting as a professor at, I'm in Michigan State University come May, you can't sell that loan to them until you get the first paycheck. So if you're a broker or a correspondent, you might not be able to do that at all. Seasonal income. Now, because this is one of the things that, they didn't chop off the second year, what they want you to do is look at the year to date, again, when present. So back to the kind of a summer example, if I work at a beach club in Michigan, I'm not working there in January when it's only 20 degrees. Nobody's swimming too much there. But if I, pick up in May and end in, October, and I haven't got it yet, I would look at the previous 2 years and do an average and confirm they should be back at around the same pay rate. Or if it's already started, I need to kind of average that in. So they're just saying, follow the same stable, increasing or decreasing rules. They're just doing a better job saying what you're needed to define it. And our calculator already handles all that. Oh, and that's it. That's the major changes there. So I've showed you the software. I've showed you a few changes. As you can see, they're not, ground or shattering or anything like that. They're actually streamlining things and, making it easier to figure out what you need to calculate. So